Now, let me turn now to what we didn't say. The rather hysterical reaction to our work confirmed one of our main points. It was very difficult to have a calm, reasoned, fact-based discussion on this topic, because most of our critics could not find fault with our logic or fault with our evidence. They accused us of saying many things we hadn't said, and in most cases, things that were the exact opposite of what we had actually written. I'm not going to bore you with all the false accusations, but just for the record, here's what we didn't say. We didn't say that the Israel lobby was a cabal or a conspiracy, part of some deep plot to control the world. In fact, we said over and over it was nothing of the sort. It was an interest group like so many others here. We did not question Israel's legitimacy or right to exist. On the contrary, we explicitly defended it. Third, we didn't blame Israel for all the problems that trouble the Middle East, and we didn't say that a normal relationship with Israel and a two-state solution would immediately solve all of them. We said it would help, but it wasn't a magic bullet or anything like that. We did not say the lobby controlled every aspect of U.S. Middle East policy or argue that it was the only reason the United States invaded Iraq or has a bad relationship with Iran. We didn't accuse members of the lobby of disloyalty, and we neither argued nor hinted that something should be done to limit the lobby's political power or marginalize its supporters. Finally, we did not connect Israel or the lobby to the 9/11 attacks themselves. We didn't say any of these things because we didn't think they were true, right? And that's important. We were accused of saying all those things, of course, and people in the lobby made repeated and sometimes successful efforts to silence us. Virtually every place we were invited to speak told us that they had been pressured to cancel our appearances, and a number of places, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, Google headquarters, the City University of New York succumbed to this pressure. But the campaign to silence us failed. The book sold well. It's been translated into over 20 languages, and John and I have remained active participants in the debate on this and other foreign policy issues. But the real question is, what impact did any of this have? What's changed and what hasn't? I think the most dramatic and obvious change since 2006 has been an opening up of discourse on this general topic. Discussions of Middle East policy and U.S.-Israeli relations are more open. A wider range of views is now being expressed. Let me just give you some of the evidence behind this claim. Media figures such as Tom Friedman, Nick Kristof, Roger Cohen, and Andrew Sullivan now write openly and at times very critically about Israeli policy, about American support for that policy, and the lobby's role in promoting it. Even Jeff Goldberg has written a couple of pieces that sound a bit like us, although I doubt he'd admit it. Articles about American Middle East policy more generally increasingly mention AIPAC's influence. It's just no longer a big secret or stuck in the background of the piece. Jon Stewart, if you watch Comedy Central at all, Jon Stewart has done a number of segments making fun of AIPAC as well. Books like Peter Beinart's Crisis of Zionism, Dan Fleshler's Transforming America's Israel Lobby, John Judas's recent Genesis have followed in our footsteps, documented the role the lobby plays in driving U.S. policy. Other people like M.J. Rosenberg have emerged as articulate and knowledgeable critics. Writers like Max Blumenthal have published critical accounts of anti-democratic trends in Israel itself. Websites like Mondoweiss, Muzzle Watch, Electronic Intifada, and others now provide alternative perspectives. And groups like J Street, Jewish Voice for Peace, Code Pink, Americans for Peace Now, and many others have become more visible and effective in presenting an alternative view to the traditional lobby organizations. Now note, these groups are not homogeneous. They don't all agree on every single issue. My point is simply that there is a much wider range of views out there now, and they are getting noticed. This development is, of course, not entirely our doing, because a number of events in the real world have made the lobby's power hard to miss. The complete failure of Barack Obama's push for a two-state solution and a settlement freeze in his first term. The craven American response to Operation Cast Lead, including the American trashing of the Goldstone report. the spectacle of the 2012 election, when the GOP candidates looked like fools trying to out-pander each other in the GOP primary season, and where Sheldon Adelson spent $100 million trying to buy the election, first for Newt Gingrich and then for Mitt Romney. Because discourse was more open and people were now aware of the role of the lobby, more people noticed these things and could put two and two together. A second development, the accusation of anti-Semitism is losing its power to intimidate. And let me be very clear about this. Like all forms of bigotry, anti-Semitism is a despicable practice. Every one of us should condemn it whenever it appears. At the same time, using false charges of anti-Semitism to stifle debate and destroy people's reputations is an ugly tactic that has no place in a democracy, and people who use it in that way should also be called to account. And I think fortunately, this tactic has been so overused and used against so many people who are obviously not anti-Semites that it's no longer able to stifle reasonable discussion. And that's going to make it easier to have an honest conversation going forward. The third change is that some of the policies the lobby has promoted are increasingly hard to defend. Instead of a weak Israeli David surrounded by a hostile Arab Goliath, we have a powerful, nuclear-armed Israel maintaining a brutal occupation for more than 4 decades, using its military power to dominate a Palestinian population denied political rights. Fourth, AIPAC and other groups in the lobby have lost several important fights in recent years. They could not convince the Bush administration to use force against Iran or support an Israeli attack on Iran. They could not derail the nomination of Chuck Hagel to be Secretary of Defense, although some hardline groups tried to do so in especially ugly ways. Earlier this year, they could not convince Obama to bomb Syria. And more recently, AIPAC could not get the Senate to pass a resolution threatening greater economic sanctions on Iran because it was widely recognized this would immediately derail any possibility of a diplomatic deal. These episodes remind us that the lobby does not control U.S. Middle East policy, does not get every single thing it wants, especially when what it wants might push the United States closer to war. That's a lot for any lobby to ask for, and it takes very special circumstances to pull something like that off. Those events, I think, also tell us that AIPAC and company are not invincible. Now, those setbacks have led a number of observers to conclude that AIPAC's in deep trouble, that the lobby's influence has been broken. Let me say why I think that is premature, because there are a number of things that haven't changed. First of all, the special relationship is still intact. We still give generous economic and military assistance, even though Israel's a wealthy country and has clear military superiority over its neighbors. And we give this aid unconditionally. There's no hint we might reduce our assistance to get Israel to stop building settlements or to allow creation of a viable Palestinian state. Second, that's, of course, why the peace process continues to go nowhere. Remember, Obama came into office promising a two-state solution in his first term and called for a settlement freeze in his famous Cairo speech in June 2009. He's been in steadfast retreat ever since. He basically gave up on this in the first term and handed the problem over to John Kerry. But there's little evidence that Kerry's efforts are going to succeed. The settlements have been expanding all the while. Notice, by the way, that a two-state solution may well be impossible at this point, but politicians in the District of Columbia continue to pretend that it is the only American goal. Now, I'm a two-state person myself, but I'm also a realist, and at some point one does have to at least start acknowledging the possibility that we're not going to get a two-state solution. Third, the lobby still gets enormous deference from American politicians. A few weeks ago, the left-wing progressive mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, was recorded telling an AIPAC group that defending Israel was part of his job description as mayor of New York. If you were paying attention, earlier this week, a number of prominent American politicians, including Secretary of State Kerry, Nancy Pelosi, and John McCain all gave the usual flowery speeches at the AIPAC policy conference. And even today, there's really no other lobbying group that gets this kind of deference and attention here in Washington. Fourth, although discourse is more open now, it is still, I think, extremely risky for young, ambitious foreign policy wannabes to question key elements of U.S. Middle East policy, and especially the special relationship. You can if you have tenure at a university, if you don't have your heart set on working in the U.S. government, or if you're retired. But it's hard to find people inside the foreign policy establishment who are willing to say what they think on this issue out loud. Just look at how Chuck Hagel and Samantha Power had to contort themselves during their confirmation hearings, and you see the lobby's continued influence. And please don't forget that we're still a long way from a deal with Iran or a two-state solution, and the lobby will be working 24/7 to make sure that the United States doesn't do anything Israel doesn't want. In short, reports of the lobby's demise have been greatly exaggerated, and given that fact, what do I think we ought to do about it? I'll just give you, I think, 4 basic lessons here. Lesson number 1, it's just politics, stupid. The first lesson I would emphasize is this is all about politics. The Israel lobby is powerful because it has all the features that make an interest group powerful. And it uses all the tools available in a democracy: direct lobbying, financial contributions, grassroots organizing, pressure on the media, etc. There is nothing magical, nothing conspiratorial about this. They're also influential because they haven't faced strong and well-organized opposition. And if they are facing greater headwinds today, say on Iran, it's because others are starting to play that political game more effectively. Lesson number 2, it's going to get worse before it gets better. The lobby's main goal is protecting the special relationship, and that's going to be harder to do as Israel moves rightward and as it becomes obvious that there's not going to be a two-state solution. Israel's control over the West Bank will be recognized more and more as apartheid. Pressure to give the Palestinians political rights is going to grow. One person, one vote is easy for Americans to understand. And if you saw the recent poll by Shibli Telhami, that's what Americans overwhelmingly favor if they believe a two-state solution is no longer possible. Then they favor one-state democracy. Getting the United States to back a state that privileges one ethnic or religious group over others is going to be an increasingly hard sell over time. And to try and make that sell, groups like AIPAC are going to have to do even more to try and influence discourse, to try and discredit critics. But in my estimation, the more strident and heavy-handed their tactics are, the more resentment it will sow, and the more people will be turned off over time. Lesson number 3. Be realistic and build a big tent. Reversing policies that have been in place for decades does not happen overnight, and you don't do it by writing a single article or a single book. What one needs is a big tent for people who want a normal relationship with Israel and a Middle East policy that conforms to a broad conception of the American national interest. That doesn't mean that everybody in this room has to agree on everything. The Israel lobby is a loose coalition united by a couple of shared goals, and we should take a page from their playbook, while making sure that our ranks are not filled with those who sow hatred or spread discredited conspiracy theories. Lastly, if we were to write the book today, how might it be different? Well, it would have to be a lot longer, because a lot of new information has come to light since 2007, and you could even argue that the entire Obama administration is a case study of the lobby's continued influence. So, we'd have to do volume 2, and it would have to be just as long as the first edition was. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think John or I would change our central arguments at all, because events since 2006, 2007 have vindicated almost all of what we wrote. To repeat, we wrote the book to encourage a more open discussion of these issues, because we thought a more open debate would bring a lot of additional truths to light and would be better for everybody in the end. Now, I think that's precisely what has happened, though, again, we do not take all the credit for it.